In-depth analysis of the Japanese economy, second edition, Japan's lost 30 years. Introduction: the 30-year fog of a burst bubble. Why did an economic miracle plummet into a 30-year decline in just a few years? The Japanese economy, co-authored by economists Takatoshi Ito and Takeo Hoshi, uses rigorous data and insightful analysis to unravel Japan's complex journey from post-war prosperity to the lost 30 years. This history is not just a tale of economic fluctuations, but a reflection of a nation losing its way in the tide of globalization. This analysis, centered on the theme of the lost 30 years, deeply explores the characteristics, causes, and impacts of Japan's economic stagnation. From the frenzy of the bubble economy to profound shifts in social culture, it offers an authoritative perspective on this period while inspiring reflections on the present. Japan's lost 30 years began in the early 1990s when the asset bubble burst, triggering a chain reaction. A financial crisis swept the nation, corporate bankruptcies surged, unemployment rose, and economic growth nearly halted. From the pinnacle of being the world's second-largest economy to a prolonged slump, Japan's experience is staggering. What caused this once miraculous economy to fade? Through detailed case studies and data, the book dissects the interplay of the bubble economy, financial system, policy failures, corporate struggles, and social structures. Let's start from the bubble's origin and peel back the layers of this historical truth. 1. The frenzy and collapse of the asset bubble in the 1980s. Japan's economy blazed like a runaway train. Land prices in Tokyo's Ginza district soared to tens of millions of yen per square meter, and the Nikkei 225 index rocketed from 7,000 points in 1980 to 38,915 in 1989. Businesses and households were caught in a wealth inflation illusion, with banks generously lending and individuals and companies frantically investing in real estate and stocks. The Japanese economy notes at the outset, the irrational rise in asset prices during the 1980s masked the fragility of the real economy. During this period, Japan's nominal GDP grew at over 5% annually, but asset price growth far outpaced the real economy, planting the seeds of the bubble. The bubble's formation was no accident. The 1985 Plaza Accord forced the yen to appreciate sharply, undermining Japan's export competitiveness. To stimulate the economy, the Bank of Japan slashed interest rates to a historic low of 2.5, fueling a credit boom. Real estate loans surged from 50 trillion yen in 1985 to 120 trillion yen by 1990, with companies and individuals blindly investing, driving asset prices higher. Take Mitsui Real Estate, for example, which aggressively acquired overseas assets in the 1980s, such as the $1.4 billion purchase of New York's Exxon building in 1989, despite a rental return rate of less than 3%, revealing the market's irrational exuberance. This frenzy stemmed from a self-reinforcing expectation. Investors believed housing and stock prices would keep rising, and banks kept lending against assets, creating a vicious cycle. Toru Yamada, a fictional middle-class Tokyo worker, bought 3 apartments with high leverage loans in 1988, hoping to profit from rent. He followed land price news daily, convinced that Tokyo would always rise. But in 1990, the Bank of Japan raised interest rates to 6% and the bubble burst. The Nikkei plummeted, the real estate market collapsed, and Yamada's apartments lost a third of their value, leaving him bankrupt under crushing debt. His story mirrors the tragedy of countless Japanese households, marking the start of the lost 30 years. The bubble's frenzy didn't just affect individuals, it reshaped Japan's urban landscape and social psyche. By the late 1980s, Tokyo became the world's most expensive city, with sky-high land prices out of reach for ordinary families. Many middle-class families took on hefty loans to buy suburban homes or invest in stocks. Miwako Yamamoto, a fictional Tokyo bank employee, invested her entire savings in the stock market in 1989, hoping for quick gains. She recalls colleagues buzzing about stock returns, as if not investing meant falling behind. But the 1990 stock market crash wiped out nearly 70% of her savings, plunging her family into hardship. Similar stories unfolded across Japan, with ordinary families' wealth illusions shattered by the bubble's collapse. The bubble also birthed a culture of national speculation. Corporate executives, office workers, and even students joined the stock and real estate craze. In Ginza's cafes, conversations shifted from literature or art to land prices and stocks. Takatoshi Ito analyzes that the speculative mindset stemmed from overconfidence in Japan's post-war economic miracle. Post-war Japan achieved rapid growth through export-led policies and high savings rates, fostering widespread belief in perpetual prosperity. Yet, this confidence overlooked external shifts like the yen's appreciation post-Plaza Accord and internal vulnerabilities in the financial system. After the bubble burst, the social psyche shifted from exuberance to confusion. Many began questioning Japan's economic model and lost trust in the government and corporations. In 1991, Tokyo's land prices fell 40%, and many real estate firms went bankrupt, leaving employees jobless. Aoki Okamoto, a fictional real estate agent, recalls his company shrinking from a 100-person team in 1989 to just a dozen by 1992, with clients vanishing. This fall from peak to abyss not only battered the economy, but plunged Japanese society into a collective sense of loss, setting the stage for the lost 30 years. The bubble's impact went beyond economics. Corporate and individual over-optimism stemmed from blind faith in the post-war economic miracle. Japan's high savings rate, government-led industrial policies, and export-driven strategies had fueled a 10% annual growth miracle. Companies like Sony and Toyota dominated globally, with Japanese proudly claiming Japan #1. But external shocks from the Plaza Accord and internal policy missteps shifted the economy from stability to speculation. Ito analyzes, the bubble's roots lie in overly loose monetary policy and lack of regulation. This frenzied feast ended in collapse, leaving lasting scars on Japan's economy. 2. Cracks and crises in the financial system post-bubble. The financial system became the epicenter of the lost 30 years. In the early 1990s, non-performing loans skyrocketed, reaching 87 trillion yen by 1998, nearly 20% of GDP. The Japanese economy dissects the financial crisis's causes. During the bubble, banks overlent, and when asset prices fell, companies couldn't repay, rapidly worsening bank balance sheets. Takeo Hoshi notes, the financial system's fragility stemmed from its over-reliance on asset prices. For example, Mitsubishi Bank, now Mitsubishi UFJ Financial Group, had a non-performing loan ratio of 15% in the early 1990s, far exceeding international warning levels. Banks tried to hide problems through accounting maneuvers, transferring bad assets to subsidiaries, but this deepened the crisis. In 1997, Yamaichi Securities collapsed, marking Japan's largest post-war financial bankruptcy. This century-old firm, unable to recover from hidden losses, shook global financial markets. Yamaichi's fall exposed the financial system's fragility and eroded public trust in banks. Kenichi Sato, a fictional Tokyo bank employee in the mid-1990s, recalls daily struggles with non-performing loans, affecting everyone from small businesses to major conglomerates. Bank morale was low, and employees avoided openly discussing the crisis. Sato once suggested speeding up bad asset cleanups to management, but was rebuffed for prioritizing stability. These financial cracks not only dragged down growth, but left Japan unable to handle external shocks. The financial crisis also hit small and medium-sized enterprises hard, as banks tightened lending. From 1990 to 1995, SME loan approval rates fell from 80% to 50%, causing many to collapse due to broken funding chains. Take Tanaka Precision Machinery in Osaka, a fictional auto parts supplier, which went bankrupt in 1992 after banks refused to renew loans. Founder Kuji Tanaka sought help from multiple sources, but banks cited high risk and decline. His closure cost 50 employees their jobs, rippling through the local economy. The financial system's cracks also sparked a broader trust crisis. Ordinary savers began doubting bank safety, shifting funds to postal savings or cash hoarding. In the mid-1990s, household cash holdings rose from 10% to 15% of total assets, further curbing investment and consumption. Ito notes that this liquidity trap was a direct cause of Japan's deflationary spiral. The banking system's deterioration also shook international investor confidence. Foreign direct investment in Japan dropped from $50 billion in 1990 to $20 billion by 1998. This capital flight deepened Japan's economic woes, highlighting the financial crisis's far-reaching impact. The 1997 Asian financial crisis further worsened Japan's export-reliant banking system. The crisis's deeper cause was lagging regulation. During the bubble, the Bank of Japan and the Ministry of Finance failed to curb banks' risky behavior, and post-crisis, they lacked decisive cleanup mechanisms. The book quotes, "Prolonged non-performing loans eroded the economy like a chronic disease." It wasn't until the early 2000s, under Junichiro Koizumi's financial revitalization plan, that bad assets were forcibly cleared, and the system began recovering. But this took over a decade, missing the golden window for economic recovery. The financial crisis's lesson lies not just in technical policy failures, but in the collapse of trust. Ordinary savers, like Sato's mother, shifted deposits to postal savings for safety. This trust crisis further suppressed investment and consumption, fueling a vicious cycle of stagnation. Corporate struggles and decline. Japan's corporations, once symbols of the post-war miracle, faced dire straits during the lost 30 years. The Japanese economy analyzes how high cost structures, rigid management, and lack of innovation eroded corporate competitiveness. In the 1990s, Japan's manufacturing was overtaken by emerging economies like South Korea and China. For instance, Japan's global electronics market share fell from 40% in 1990 to 20% by 2000, with home appliances and semiconductors hit hardest. Toshiba's case is poignant. A leader in the 1980s global semiconductor market, Toshiba faltered in the 1990s due to slow decisions and conservative leadership, missing the digital revolution. In the 2000s, its overexpansion in nuclear power led to massive losses. In 2015, Toshiba's accounting scandal, inflating profits by 152 billion yen, exposed deep governance issues. Ito notes, Japan's lifetime employment system, while stabilizing workers, stifled innovation. Corporate struggles also stemmed from Japan's unique keiretsu culture and governance model. Post-war, keiretsu groups like Mitsubishi and Mitsui formed tight networks via cross-shareholding and bank loans, offering stability during high growth, but becoming a burden post-bubble. For example, Mitsui & Co., was forced to sell core assets in the 1990s due to a debt crisis, with its cross-held subsidiaries unable to adapt quickly due to lack of independence. Hoshi analyzes, the Keiretsu system's rigidity left firms inflexible in crises. This governance flaw made many firms slow to respond to global competition. Take Sharp, once renowned for LCDs, which failed to shift to digital technologies in the 1990s, losing market share to Samsung and LG. In 2000, Sharp clung to outdated CRT TVs, while Korean firms embraced flat panel displays. By 2008, Sharp's profits fell from 100 billion yen to a 50 billion yen loss, leading to its 2016 acquisition by Taiwan's Foxconn. Sharp's decline reflects not just technical missteps, but a conservative corporate culture. Tomoko Matsui, a fictional mid-level Sharp manager, recalls suggesting increased digital tech R&D in the late 1990s, only to be rejected over short-term profit concerns. She notes, there was a maintain the status quo atmosphere, fearing change. This culture curbed innovation and left Japan trailing in global tech competition. In contrast, Apple in the US sees the early 2000s with rapid iteration and open innovation, launching the iPod and dominating markets. This contrast highlights Japan's strategic missteps during the lost 30 years. SMES also struggled. Kazuo Fujita, a fictional Osaka machinery factory owner, lost bank loans in the early 1990s, unable to upgrade equipment, with orders shifting to Korean and Taiwanese competitors. His attempts to cut staff to reduce costs failed due to employee protests and union pressure, forcing his factory to close in 1998. Fujita's plight reflects the broader fate of SMES. Without policy support or innovation, survival was tough in a stagnant economy. Yet, some firms showed resilience. Toyota, through lean production and global expansion, recovered by the late 1990s, becoming the world's second-largest automaker by 2003. Toyota's success came from flexible strategies, like investing in the Prius hybrid, capturing the eco-car market early. The book notes, successful transformation requires breaking traditional models and embracing technological innovation and global markets. But for most firms, the pain of transformation was too great, and many sank in competition. Corporate struggles tied closely to Japan's industrial structure. Post-war Japan relied on export-driven manufacturing, but globalization, high labor costs, and slow tech iteration eroded competitiveness. For example, Panasonic's profits fell from 300 billion yen in 1990 to 50 billion yen by 2000 due to over-reliance on domestic markets. Panasonic's struggles reflect a broader issue. How could Japanese firms reposition in global value chains? This challenge was not just economic, but cultural and institutional. 4. The cost and lessons of policy missteps during the lost 30 years. Policy failures deepened the economic crisis. The Japanese economy critiques the government and central bank's responses. In the early 1990s, the Bank of Japan delayed addressing non-performing loans, allowing zombie firms to proliferate. These firms survived on government subsidies and bank loans, dragging down economic efficiency. Hoshi writes, policy inaction turned a short-term shock into long-term stagnation. In the early 1990s, the Bank of Japan raised interest rates from 2.5% to 6% to curb the bubble, triggering a credit crunch. Companies and individuals couldn't repay loans, plunging the economy into a vicious cycle. Take the 1993 10 trillion yen stimulus plan, which aimed to boost the economy through infrastructure, but funneled funds into low-efficiency projects, like a Hokkaido highway with under 30% usage. Policy failures also stemmed from Japan's conservative bureaucracy. Post-war Japan's bureaucracy was known for stability, but it was slow to respond in crises. The Ministry of Finance delayed tackling non-performing loans in the early 1990s, fearing bank failures would spark social unrest. For instance, when Hyogo Bank collapsed in 1995, the government spent hundreds of billions of yen to bail it out, avoiding depositor panic. This delay tactic stabilized the short term, but let zombie firms linger, hurting efficiency. The 1990s fiscal stimulus plans also revealed flawed policy design. Multiple large-scale infrastructure projects, like the 1998 15 trillion yen stimulus, channeled funds to politically connected regions rather than high-growth sectors. For example, a Kyushu town of Unraveling spent 300 billion yen on an airport with less than 20% of its designed passenger capacity. Ito critiques, inefficient fiscal spending was like pouring water into a leaky bucket. These projects failed to boost the economy and increased fiscal burdens. Kentaro Hayashi, a fictional local official, recalls his prefecture vying for central funds in the late 1990s, proposing infrastructure projects that ignored local needs. Built highways and cultural centers sat idle, symbolizing vanity projects. This policy waste not only squandered resources, but further eroded public trust in the government. Such useless investments failed to stimulate demand and pushed public debt from 60% of GDP in 1990 to 140% by 2000. Another policy misstep was the 1997 consumption tax hike from 3% to 5%, which directly hit consumer demand, with retail sales falling 4.2% that year. Misaki Nakamura, a fictional Tokyo supermarket clerk, recalls customers dropping by a third after the tax hike, leading to her store's closure. Her experience shows how policy errors trickled down to ordinary lives. In the early 2000s, Heizo Takanaka's financial and economic reforms aimed to break the deadlock. His postal privatization and bank restructuring sparked widespread controversy. Naoki Takahashi, a fictional Yokohama postal worker, says the reforms unsettled traditional industry workers, sparking union protests. Takanaka's reforms cleared some bad assets long-term, but heightened social tensions short-term, highlighting Japan's struggle to balance reform and stability. The core issue was poor coordination. The Bank of Japan and Ministry of Finance had conflicting goals, controlling inflation versus stimulating growth, canceling out policies. The book quotes, "Fragmented policies cost Japan a swift recovery." Only by the mid-2000s did financial system cleanups show results, but the cost of stagnation was deeply embedded in society. 5. Deep cultural roots of social stagnation. Behind economic stagnation lay profound social shifts. The Japanese economy highlights population aging, rigid workplace culture, and declining social mobility as deep roots of the lost 30 years. From 1990 to 2020, Japan's over 65 population rose from 12% to 28%, with the labor force shrinking by about 10 million, increasing pension burdens. Workplace culture's rigidity worsened the issue. Lifetime employment and seniority-based systems stifled young people's advancement and innovation. Ishiru Suzuki, a fictional young engineer, joined a major manufacturer in the 1990s, but found his ideas ignored due to his junior status. His proposals were repeatedly rejected, leading him to jump to Silicon Valley, where he developed successful logistics software. Suzuki's story reflects Japan's workplace culture dilemma, prioritizing stability over creativity. Declining social mobility also showed in education and class solidification. Competition for elite universities like Tokyo University intensified, with middle-class families pouring resources into getting children into top schools, only to face limited job prospects post-graduation. Now Takahashi, a fictional Tokyo University graduate, faced corporate layoffs and economic stagnation in the early 2000s, settling for low-paying, non-regular work. Her shift from elite to freelancer reflects the lost generation's despair. Economic stagnation also birthed a low-desire society. Young people lost interest in marriage, homeownership, and childbearing, with Japan's marriage rate falling nearly 40% from 1980 to 5.5 per mil by 2010. This phenomenon wasn't just about marriage or childbirth, but reflected shifts in consumer behavior. In the mid-1990s, consumption spending growth fell from 5% in the 1980s to under 1%, with durable goods like appliances and cars seeing persistent slumps. Retail giant Daimaru's sales fell from 1.2 trillion yen in the 1990s to 800 billion yen by 2000, with store numbers shrinking. Consumers delayed purchases, expecting further price drops, fueling a deflationary spiral. Young people's career choices also shifted. Traditionally, entering large firms was a badge of honor, but non-regular employment rose from 20% in 1990 to 35% by 2000. Many graduates abandoned stable job pursuits for freelance or short-term contract work. Shuta Yamashita, a fictional Kyoto University graduate, joined an ad agency in the early 2000s, but faced frequent layoffs due to economic woes. He became a freelance illustrator, trading stability for freedom. His choice reflects a generation questioning traditional career paths and a broader uncertainty about the future. Education pressures worsened social stagnation. Cram schools and private education became heavy burdens for middle-class families. Reina Satu, a fictional Tokyo mother, spent 2 million yen annually on tutoring for her son to enter Waseda University, only for him to land low-paying temp work post-graduation. She laments, "We invested everything in education, but it didn't secure his future." This declining return on education weakened social mobility and deepened class divides. Cultural shifts were also notable. Japan's traditional collectivism emphasized loyalty and sacrifice, but economic stagnation pushed younger generations toward individualism. The rise of social media, like Japan's Mixi in the early 2000s, amplified this, with youths venting frustrations about rigid workplaces and sharing freelance experiences. This cultural shift opened space for innovation, but reduced social cohesion. Ito notes, "The low-desire society is both the result of economic stagnation and a barrier to recovery." Gender role rigidity also persisted. In the 1990s, women's workforce participation was just 40%, far below Western nations. Economic stagnation led firms to favor male employees, pushing women into low-paying, non-regular jobs. Ayaka Tanaka, a fictional trading company employee in the late 1990s, was forced into contract work after layoffs. She recalls, "The company saw women as suited for short-term roles, a bias that stunted my career." This gender inequality limited women's economic contributions and weakened Japan's labor potential. Masaki Yamamoto, a young woman working at a Tokyo cafe, says, "High housing costs and low income make marriage and homeownership feel distant." This mindset, rooted in uncertainty about the future, suppressed consumption and investment, perpetuating a vicious cycle. Cultural impacts run deep. Japan's collectivist culture, emphasizing stability and loyalty, grew out of sync with globalization and economic stagnation. Younger generations abandoned the idea of lifelong corporate devotion, seeking personal value. The book analyzes, economic stagnation shattered Japan's equality myth, deepening generational divides. This cultural rift, both a product and driver of economic woes, further hindered recovery. 6. Japan's predicament in a global context. The lost 30 years wasn't an isolated phenomenon. Global shifts exacerbated Japan's woes. The Japanese economy analyzes Japan's challenges from a globalization perspective, caught between a resurgent U.S. economy and rising Asian markets. The U.S. achieved 3.5% annual GDP growth from 1990 to 2000 through the IT revolution, while Japan lagged in tech innovation. Emerging Asian markets further eroded Japan's competitiveness. For example, Samsung Electronics surpassed Japanese appliance makers in the early 2000s through rapid iteration and global strategies. In the 1990s, Sony lost its lead in digital cameras to Canon and Nikon, with its market share falling below 20% by 2005. The book notes, Japan's position in global value chains slipped from leader to follower. Global monetary shifts also hurt. The yen's volatility from 80 to $1 in 1995 to 140 in 1998 weakened export competitiveness. Ito analyzes that globalization demanded flexible responses from firms and government, but Japan's rigid systems and conservative policies missed opportunities. James Carter, a fictional U.S. Silicon Valley entrepreneur whose tech startup rode the internet boom, growing tenfold in 5 years. His success contrasts with Japan's slow-reacting firms. Sony, which dominated with the Walkman in the 1980s, was outpaced by Apple's iPod in the digital music era. This global competitive lag was not just technical, but strategic and cultural. Globalization also brought labor market challenges. Japan's high labor costs and strict regulations struggled against low-cost competition from China and Southeast Asia. Sharp's LCD dominance was eroded by Chinese and Korean firms, with its market share falling from 30% to 10% by 2010. This competitive loss deepened Japan's economic woes. Conclusion: lessons from the lost 30 years, is Japan's economic wound and a mirror for global economies. The Japanese economy, with its rigorous analysis, reveals how the bubble economy, financial crisis, corporate struggles, policy failures, and social stagnation wove this prolonged downturn. Takatoshi Ito and Takeo Hoshi's insights show a nation's complex choices amid economic challenges, offering valuable lessons. Japan's experience teaches that economic stagnation is rarely a single event, but a confluence of factors. The bubble's frenzy stemmed from over-optimism, the financial crisis worsened due to regulatory failures, corporate decline from lack of innovation, policy errors from poor coordination, and social stagnation from rigid culture and structures. These lessons warn that any economy could face similar challenges, especially amid globalization and technological change. For individuals and firms, adaptability and innovation are critical in uncertainty. Toru Yamada's bankruptcy and Kazuo Fujita's factory closure highlight the need for flexibility in economic tides. Ishiru Suzuki's Silicon Valley success shows the power of proactive transformation. Ito writes, economic stagnation's roots lie in failing to adapt. Successful economies must embrace innovation and flexibility. In today's fast-changing global economy, individuals and firms must keenly sense environmental shifts. Individuals can build resilience through continuous learning and skill building. Firms must focus on core strengths, optimize resources, and avoid reckless expansion. Globalization and technological revolutions bring both opportunities and challenges. Finding one's place in this complex landscape is a question everyone must ponder. Japan's lost 30 years is not just history but a mirror. It reminds us that prosperity can vanish quickly and stagnation can creep in silently. In an uncertain era, staying vigilant, embracing change, and seizing opportunities is the key to overcoming challenges.